So we've been hearing a lot of great things about growth mindset, but in this video I want to actually talk a little bit about some of the problems of growth mindset. So the main thing that we're going to talk about here is, I have a few different words for it. You may have seen one of my other videos on this, but I call it a hyper belief in growth mindset. It's this idea that people are starting to think it's a cure-all or this magic formula, and also that you either have it or you don't, you have growth mindset or you don't, and we're starting to even divide people into categories, when the truth is that it's a complex thing. All of us have different mindsets at different times of day, depending on our blood sugar, depending on the area of life it is, our age, all of that stuff. And so it's not an either-or kind of thing. And it's also not necessarily a magic formula. There's a lot more going on that we actually need to attend to before we even think about how to help someone change their mindset, because that requires a lot of cognitive power, and a person actually needs to feel very safe and cared for, and there's a lot of basic needs that need to be met in order for someone to even have access to the brain architecture needed to alter their mindset and their attitude about something. So the first thing is we're going to talk about hyperbelief, and I kind of have this diagram where on one hand we have something called, what I call bottom-up extremism, and on the other end is this idea of top-down extremism. So this idea of extremism. So when someone basically says, no matter what, it's just in your mind. It's always mind over matter. Just change your attitude and you'll change your life. Those people are coming from a very top-down extremist point of view, saying that it's just in your mind and that's all you have to do. And the problem with that is, what that leads to is that kind of lets society off the hook for trying to tend to the conditions and the environments of many people that are going through adversity and toxic stress, no matter what their situation is. But if there's a lot of stress and adversity, and we are saying that it's just in your mind, it creates kind of apathy. And I have on the handout that it lets society off the hook for trying to actually tend to the environments of people, off the hook. So what I'm trying to say here is that before we even talk about mindset, we actually need to think about something that I would call the idea of safety. And what I mean by safety is, if a person is not feeling like there's so much that happens when someone has an adverse home environment, an adverse, toxic, stressful community environment, any kind of thing like that, they're not going to feel safe to even go into their own mind, because there is so much going on that happens because of stress and the lack of different resources a person is going to have mentally when they're going through so much stress is not even going to allow them to tend to this concept of mindset. So we need to also acknowledge how much stress and that toxicity of environments can affect somebody coming into our workplace, coming into our classroom, and we need to create conditions of safety. And we're not going to go too much into depth in that in this course. That's going to be some more advanced courses when we really talk about this idea of emotional and social safety. But just for us to remember that the conditions of where we work, do we make it safe to fail, safe to make mistakes, safe to express our voice, our unique creativity? Do we allow creativity? Do people have to get answers right or wrong? And is there a system that's saying there's a right or wrong at all times? Are we allowing people to question authority, questioning where information is coming from? Those are conditions of safety that people need to have so that they can actually put their guard down for a moment when they're in the classroom. Does the leader, the teacher, the educator, do you show signs of vulnerability where sometimes you let people know you make mistakes, that you feel nervous or awkward, or that you fail at times and you learn from it? If you're creating those kinds of conditions, you're going to allow for someone to feel a little bit more relaxed in that environment, because many people in the world are coming from home and community environments that are so stressful that there is no letting the guard down. So that's something we need to really think about in the classroom. That's where that trust and connection piece comes in. That comes first. The idea of connection, trust, and safety, that has to happen first before we even talk about this idea of perseverance or effort or any of that kind of stuff. So the other side of that, though, is that some people are coming from a bottom-up extremist point of view, which is that they're kind of saying that we should never, ever talk about mindset until all conditions of that person are totally alleviated and ideal and optimal, and that every basic need, every single need and condition has to be perfect before we even touch on the concept of mindset. That's also dangerous, because there is power in the idea of, even if not all the conditions are ideal for someone, even if they're coming from an extremely adverse, traumatic, toxic environment or past or childhood or whatever that is, there can be moments, and we've seen it in the research, especially resilience research, where just the presence of somebody in a person's life, someone who has high expectations of that person, who models what feeling calm in the midst of a storm looks like, who is able to embrace mistakes and adversity and failure as a moment of learning. When we can have moments of that and we can model that for somebody, there can be a moment where their mindset will make a difference, even when they're not in ideal conditions. And if we treat it as though we cannot talk about mindset until all those conditions are perfect, we're going to be stuck for a very long time. So there has to be a middle ground. Coming from the Greek Stoics, we got to go into the middle ground here. It's not about alleviating everything, because this bottom-up extremism, to me, leads to hopelessness and resignation, because we are not going to alleviate and optimize and perfect every single condition that exists. I also would call this one I would call conditional thinking, conditional safety, conditional power, and this one is unconditional, meaning that in this one, we wait for all conditions before we allow ourselves to change our mind about something or perception, and this one, we allow ourselves to possibly see something in a new light, even when the conditions aren't ideal. I believe there is more power in this one, but I think that it's really important we don't go to this extreme point of view where we don't acknowledge how much conditions of a person, especially when they're young and they don't have a choice about what conditions they're raised in. If we don't acknowledge that, we are ignoring the effects that the severe and traumatic and adverse conditions can have on a person's actual brain architecture. And we must deal with that alongside the idea of mindset.